Welcome, everyone. Tonight, believe it or not, is the very last of the creative writing and photography lessons that we will be teaching as part of the current Conchas y Café series. Of course, to kind of remind everyone that, this series, the theme was through the lens. And as the weeks have gone by, we've talked about, different concepts in photography and some concepts in poetry as well. Uh, but through the lens is very much open to interpretation, and we're going to be, at least for tonight, for this final lesson, talking about one potential interpretation of the concept through the lens. A través del lente, siendo el tema de esta serie, se puede interpretar de varias maneras, y ojalá podamos hablar un poquito sobre eso esta noche. Again, for those of you that are joining on Zoom, I did upload the handout, and if you'd like to follow along by downloading the handout, you're more than welcome to do so. In any case, we will be obviously sharing it on the screen too, so you're more than welcome to follow along just on the screen. Pero para empezar esta noche, vamos a, como siempre, bueno, como es típico, ¿verdad? Empezar con una cita. Tonight's first quote, as you can see, we have two quotes this week, but the first quote comes from Patrick Rothfuss. Hopefully I said that correctly. Fue nacido el 6 de junio en el año 1973. Es autor norteamericano más conocido por su serie Las Crónicas King Killer. The King Killer Chronicles um, are apparently very popular, have been around for several years, and are really what Patrick Rothfuss is most known for. And he is quoted as saying through this particular series, when we are children, we seldom think of the future. This innocence leaves us free to enjoy ourselves as few adults can. The day we fret about the future is the day we leave our childhood behind. Y en español se los traducí a decir, cuando somos niños, rara vez pensamos en el futuro. Esa inocencia nos deja ser libre para disfrutar como poco adulto puede. El día que nos preocupamos por el futuro es el día en que dejamos por detrás a nuestra niñez. So, ¿cómo les parece? ¿Qué piensan de la cita de Patrick Rothfuss? What does this particular quote say to you? Feel free to raise your hands. You can drop it in the chat if you feel more comfortable putting it in the chat. I like how Nettie put it. It's when reality hits you in the face. He misses being a kid. I agree with you, Nettie. I miss being a child too. ¿Alguien más? Any other thoughts or ideas related to this quote that we see here tonight? River writes, it tells me I'm too old. I don't find security in not having some concept of the future in my present. Interesting. I take it you're kind of a planner. Yes, Julie, I see your
I,
hand.
I think it's related to the idea of play,
Mm,
because I think that um, when we leave the innocence behind, we start thinking about the future. Play sort of gets thrown into the garbage can, and that's when we lose a lot of our creative self and spontaneous self, and I think the core of who we really are.
mm. Interesting. Yeah, I could see how, play does play a major role in our development. And if we are constantly developing, then, maybe that means that we're constantly playing in some way or another, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
thank you
think
for sharing.
speaks to me of ages
Hmm.
because I think we develop in different stages and that's how we perceive our reality in different ways. When we're kids, when we're teenagers, when we're adults, when we're senior. So all these are factors that change how we view the world. And I think this I don't know, romanticizing of the childhood sometimes gets us because we think we're stuck in this adult form, but in reality, it's how you view the world, right? And so it's kind of a trick of your mind as well.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe it's not a perfect way of describing the importance of play, going back to what Julie was saying, right? Because we could play as adults, obviously we play as kids, you know. Um, so yeah, something to think about. Thank you, Abraham. Carolyn wrote in the chat, I remember being a kid and thinking a lot about the future, wanting to be an adult so I can do whatever I want. And I play a lot more now. Yeah, I could definitely, what's the word? Um, identify with that. Yeah. Although I do have to admit that I don't know if as a child, I really thought about being an adult. I was kind of at a very early age put in positions where I had to be like an adult. So for me, my experience is probably not as clear cut, you know. I can't really say that there was a major point where I stopped being a kid altogether. I mean, de por sí me encantan las películas de los cómics. So that's maybe something that could be considered childish, although who knows at this point.
Welcome to the club. And I think Casey wants to speak.
Casey?
I, can you repeat? Did you have a specific question, or was it just what you think about the quote?
Yeah, it's just what your impression is of the quote.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of stuff. The last thought I just had was, if I think maybe I never had a childhood. I feel like I was fretting about the future like really early. Um, but the original thought I had was, and I don't, trust me, I don't practice this, but um people talk about how important it is to stay in the present
Mhm.
and to or like also how like I have some like medical things that I was like really worried about, and this person I told about what's going on, he's like, well, you can't, worrying doesn't do any good. You just need to like make the appointment and show up and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
um so yeah, I could have probably worried a lot more, but I think that helped me a little bit. And yeah, just I don't know, always felt like maybe yeah, I want to be older. It looks so much cooler. And like maybe I didn't like what I had. And I was like, damn, I want what they have.
Mhm.
And I always was like, my life sucks, like anyway. And I guess I don't know. I also thought of I don't know the quote by Pablo Picasso, but didn't he say something about like becoming a child was like the goal of him as an artist, to
Hmm.
become young again or something? Like anyway, there's a lot in here to think about. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Casey, for sharing your thoughts. And I think that well, I can't really confirm that Pablo Picasso said anything along those lines, but I think that there is something to that for us, particularly as artists. We kind of like I was saying before, we don't necessarily stop playing, especially if we're trying to always, refine our talents and refine our skills. The process of experimentation as we get older in our arts practice, that's something that is maybe very similar to play. So we could always think of it that way, right? um, but I appreciate the fact that you brought up the idea of potentially being like a little bit of a worry wart as a child, and that maybe being something that you learned to manage as you got older, as you met other people, which I think is also very important to thinking about how we develop as individuals and how our perspectives change over time. Uh, Thank you, Abraham, for looking up the quote. Abraham's little research quickly here says the quote from Pablo Picasso is, "Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up." Um, so, yeah, a lot of that does obviously speak to I think some of the things that we're bringing up. And then we actually have a comment on our Instagram live from looks like Grecia. Thinking of the future implies other people's expectations. I think as children, the innocence is freedom and it's probably a healthier mindset and body set. Future is always in relation to others in a more serious way. And yeah, I could see how that applies. Thinking about the future is not just thinking about ourselves. In some cases, it's also about thinking about others and the impact that we could potentially have in the lives of others, or in our own lives, perhaps. So thank you, Gracia. Now, we don't normally like to have more than one quote for our opening sessions, but I did find this second one, which I thought was also really interesting quote to consider. This one comes from Flannery O'Connor, nacida el 25 de marzo en el año 1925 y fallecida el 3 de agosto 1964. Fue novelista, cuentista y ensayista norteamericana. Y aquí, como pueden ver, dice, la persona que ha sobrevivido su niñez tiene suficiente información sobre la vida para durarle el resto de sus días. I kind of like this one. This one to me seems a little more tongue in cheek. Um, but as Flannery O'Connor says here, anybody who has survived his childhood has enough information about life to last him the rest of his days. So, ¿qué dicen? ¿Cómo les parece la cita de Flannery O'Connor? And it seems like we already have a comment from River. The Flannery O'Connor quote is the quote for me. I'm grateful for my childhood and I appreciate many things about it, but you couldn't pay me to go back. However, it prepared me for a lot of adulthood. Yeah, that I 100% identify with. My childhood, I think, really did prepare me to be an adult. I don't want to get into the sad story of my childhood, but
Yeah, but I think the words kind of call for that. What says survive?
mm,
Because it's not about thriving or remembering, it's surviving. So it's already telling you that's a little rough.
yeah, yeah, yes. And I agree with Carolyn. Our childhood shapes us. I think that's a simple way, right? Like a nice, concise way of saying what Flannery O'Connor says here. Any other thoughts, comments, opinions? Julie?
Um, the American Indians, the indigenous cultures, they would let the children learn from their environment. They would let them go out and be wild almost. But it wasn't that they were wild, it was that they were learning. They were learning from their environment. And, in Western society, we kind of have lost that because there's a very structured way for us to learn things now as children. And it's not better. It's
Hmm.
not better. And, you know, everybody has their own unique, especially here in America, unique experience with it. And yeah, I had an intense childhood, I have to say. Um, uh, but as children, we get traumatized, and I think that's almost like what he's talking about
Hmm.
is the trauma that we endure as children.
Hmm.
One artist, Mike, I forget his name, Mike. He's really famous. Um, he did a whole video, and he put all the different traumatic um, scenes uh, from all the videos that he found on YouTube of kids being traumatized,
Mhm.
enduring trauma when they were kids. It was phenomenal. And when you see it, you just go, "Oh my god, this is I I had that trauma, and it's amazing how much trauma we have to endure."
Yeah, I think that there's certainly a fair share of trauma that gets passed around, from generation to generation. And, some people can take it in a way that it, creates resilience, but at the same time, there's always that potential for it to come back and, affect us in a negative way, in a harmful way in the future. And, the as Casey said earlier, the concept of living in the moment, is one of those things that people can sometimes sort of use as a crutch, right, for justifying certain behaviors. Um and other times it's just a good practice for recognizing your thoughts, right? And so it's a very complex thing, in the end. And managing trauma is one of those things that I think is a skill that is valuable for everyone to learn over the course of experience. Um, yeah, River wrote, managing mass trauma and the people around me feels like a full-time job we can't be fired from.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely uh,
What I wanted to say is that in a lot of ways, it's kind of like what Julie was talking about,
mhm,
even in other countries. I think in America, we teach black and white. We don't let the students learn from their mistakes. If they get a math problem wrong, in other countries, they let them say, okay, maybe you can try again, or maybe you can try to figure this out. But a lot of times, in the US, the way we educate, it's like, okay, you got it wrong. It's wrong. Zero credit. And so I think that that can be very traumatizing, especially for people who struggle with math. You know,
yeah,
if you, I was one of those people, I did take advanced math, but it was the hardest thing I've ever, like one of the hardest things that I've ever experienced is just trying to learn it. And I have this problem with the grading policy. Like it would take me a long time to learn it, and I would learn it at the end, like with the final, but then I would still get like a B or a C. And to me, it's like if I mastered it and I could get an A on the final, but because of my other grades, I should have an A because I mastered it eventually.
mhm,
And so I think other countries are more forgiving and teach children mistakes are okay. Now let's see how we can figure this out. Instead of in a lot of our education system, it's right or wrong and that's it. So I don't know. That's what I got from it. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you for sharing, Erica. And yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that I think we're discussing are definitely going to change based on location, based on cultural background, and a lot of the things that are coming up. Um, and managing trauma in ourselves and in others, those are things that um, depending on again culture and perspective, right? They can change the ways in which we interact with people and the way that we interact with even ourselves, and that's probably where it is obviously beneficial for people to not feel so alone and to be in community and with community, because it's a support system, right? A support network. And again, not to like get too into sort of the traumas that we experience, but to I guess bring it back to what we've been talking about, and to also do a quick little review. We've been talking a lot about photography and the ways in which we create exposures, right? So just as a little review, a little refresher, we have what's called the exposure triangle. And in this case, this is the photographic one, right? Hablando de fotografía, pues tenemos el triángulo de exposición. Tenemos la apertura, el ISO, o la sensibilidad a la luz, y luego la velocidad de obturación, right? Shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. Each one of them work together to ultimately create an exposure. And your exposure is going to be really about this, right? The recorded moment in photography. It's a recording of a very specific, very fine moment, very finite moment. When we talk about human exposure, though, to sort of turn this into a metaphor, there's the human exposure triangle as well. A lot of the human exposure triangle, and bear with me, and I kind of made this up. So, I might not be 100% accurate in my description here for you, but this is what I was really thinking about the last like week or so when thinking about tonight's lesson and why photography matters and why poetry matters for us as a community, for us as people who are trying to express ourselves. It really comes down to our humanity. Y así como somos humanos traumados y todo, tenemos algo que por lo menos podemos compartir con el mundo a través del triángulo de exposición. At least that's how I look at it, right? Each one of these things are the things that kind of impact our perspective on life. And when it comes to the human exposure, I mean, perspective is everything, right? We could talk about it as a depth of field or a point of view, but all of those things that make up who we are, they affect our perspective, whether we are conscious of it or not. Of course, our physical presence is going to be one of the things that actually is going to affect our perspective the most. It's what people typically will see first, right? It's the phenotypical expression, the phenotype expression of, say, your height, right? How tall you are, the hair color that you have, the eye color that you have, your skin tone. You may or may not be treated differently based off of these things. That also includes the way that your phenotype is expressed in your physical capabilities. Some people are bigger than others. Some people are smaller than others. Some people have the capacity for building more strength than others. Some people don't. These are just different things that affect our individual perspectives. And that can also go so far as, the use of assistive devices. People who wear glasses, as an example, are usually treated as people who know more just by the implicit bias that comes with that. People assume that because you wear glasses, you're a nerd. Abraham. And, like we get treated differently because of that. But then you go further with that and start looking at, how you might yourself treat a person who walks with a cane or with a walker or who uses a wheelchair. Do you sit down when you speak to someone who is in a wheelchair so that you could be eye to eye with them, as a sign of respect? Or do you, kind of unknowingly use your height as a way to talk down, literally, to people? Right? Like those things all will affect your perspective and the other person's perspective. Of course, we also have to talk about cultural heritage, the ways in which our cultures, our cultural background, whether that be, in the place that you live or the place that your family comes from, like those kinds of things do obviously uh, sort of, give a certain color to your perspective. The same would go with a religious or a moral upbringing. Those kinds of things, they change the way that we navigate the world. Or will impact the way that we navigate the world. And then there's, of course, gender, right? There's a gender identity that is assigned at birth, and then there's a true gender identity. There's not necessarily just one way to live. And then this one that we were talking about, vocation, or the community in which you reside, right? Things are different here in the US when compared to other areas of the world. We have a lot more freedoms here in the US than most other countries have. Even countries such as Mexico, where my family comes from, there's a certain level of freedom there, freedom of press, things that people in the political sphere might say we have, but the reality is going to express itself in a very different way, um, based on a lot of these other things that are come before it. Um, Plus, we have to also talk about the institutionalized education systems, right? Those different ways in which we are schooled, those also are going to impact our perspective. History is told by the winner, and it's oftentimes going to be one-sided. And that's kind of one of the functions of an institutionalized education system. We can try and find as much information as we can on our own, but ultimately we start somewhere, and it's usually in some form of an institution. So perspective, this tends to be like the basis for our human exposure triangle. Then there's, of course, the sensibilities that we have, right? And our experiences, the things that we actually are exposed to. Hablando de exposición, en el caso de el triángulo de exposición humana, podemos hablar de no solo la perspectiva, como había mencionado anteriormente, pero también la movilidad personal, right? Our ability to move in a world physically, whether that be by bike, by car, by bus. Public transit is not always the most accessible thing, especially here in LA, right? So accessibility to mobility, and mobility at all levels, that is something that can also affect our perspective on life. And it's something that can also keep or actually promote experiencing other things in the world. The most important one that I think we need to always reflect on is our personal biases. Everyone has biases. Todos tenemos prejuicios. No importa quién te crees. Todos tenemos prejuicios, whether we like to admit it or not. So it's important to understand when we have these implicit biases, right? The ways in which we navigate the world are going to always be, informed by the things that we've experienced, by the ways in which we've interpreted our experiences. All of these things really are, again, important for us to be able to recognize. And sometimes it's overt biases. I mean, growing up where I grew up during the time period that I grew up, where there was a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment in San Diego, I mean, I experienced a lot of direct racism. And it wasn't just, as I had mentioned earlier, from white people, but also from, people in my own ethnic community. It was sad and very self-destructive. And then there's also the perception of mental acuity. I remember very, very clearly as a child, because I didn't speak English first. I remember very clearly my English teachers, my teachers in elementary school, speaking slower to me, thinking that I was stupid and just not capable, right? So it was their external perception of my mental acuity. And sometimes it's based on age. There's certain things that children can understand and certain things that maybe can't understand. And then there's also, certain instances where it's about mental development, delays. There's always those things that could also affect a person's ability to comprehend and interpret information as they receive it. So, there's those things that will always kind of play a role in our lifetimes. And then time, moments, and its passage. All right. The beautiful thing about time for us, for most of us, is that, we, if our memory is good, we can always reflect back on things that have happened to us. We have that capacity. That's one of the few things that, at least in I think, our human capabilities, right? We're able to articulate what we have gone through, and we're able to reflect on what we've gone through in order to either reinterpret or learn from, or come away with some sort of newly gained perspective or intuition, um, based on experience. Again, the human exposure triangle is, my little theory that I tried to develop here is really about just kind of understanding that we all go through shit, and the shit that we go through paints what we, do in our future. It's not to say that it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just, this is how things are. And the more that we can be aware of them, the more that we can look back and reflect and, take what is good and, learn from what is bad. I think the more we can still maintain some sense of innocence, right? Some sense of play, some sense of childhood. And in the end, I think that that's kind of, as we were saying before, that's what art is for, right? Art allows us that ability to play in a way that maybe we don't always have in our everyday life. But if you allow yourself those moments to sit down and write, to sit down and create, I think those moments will help us with just navigating the human exposure triangle and getting something out of it, some kind of exposure that can, I don't know, help us process, right? Does anyone have any questions on my little theory here before we move on to the first exercise? Or any insights or comments on it? Yes, Nettie?
Um, yeah, there's some overlap to the way I see it.
Mhm.
It's there, of course, we are born with some inherent characteristics,
Mhm.
but I've been recently reading most of the books of Robert Greene.
Mhm.
One of his points, and I agree with him, he says that in the 18th century, when people used to go to a cafe, probably in the major European cities, people acted, people wore a mask,
Mm.
and people had like they understood the difference between acting and their private lives once they went back home. And he says that now we have blurred that line. We are struggling with our identity because we're mixing our personality, our identity with the role. And he says that as children, we learn to act. We love acting. We love playing Spider-Man. We love playing Batman.
Mhm.
So it's something inherent in humans to act and to somehow wear a mask. Well, even though that could have multiple meanings,
Mhm.
I think that we just have to play the role well, but somehow we have to make a difference between identity and the role. I mean, I struggle with that too. So, but I'm kind of curious about that point of view, and I would just like to hear what everybody else has to say.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that, Nettie. And I like that you said that there's overlap because there absolutely is, you know. Sin duda, igual como el triángulo de exposición en fotografía, cada uno de estos elementos concuerda o quizá, manipula otro lado del triángulo, right? That there's no way in which we can, change the aperture without having to somehow change our ISO or somehow change our shutter speed, right? Every single element plays a role in this concept, right? That's why it's, at least in photography, right, the exposure triangle. And in my little attempt here to create a new theory, the human exposure triangle, it's the same, right? Everything is impacted by everything else. But yeah, Abraham, your thoughts, and then Julie.
Thanks. Well, just to come back to Nettie's question on how he sees people acting and how people are being themselves in a way. And I had a painting that I did years back, and it has a bunch of masks. And my intent for the painting was for it to represent all the faces, all these. But at the time, I thought it more of as kind of evil thing or a bad thing about people being fake and all these masks of how they acted. But later, I came back again, like Luis is saying, time, right? That's still part of exposure of how viewed things, right? And so I went back and I look at the painting differently nowadays. I see as the whole mask, all this that you see in the painting are basically yourself, because we are not just like one type of person. We're a different type of people inside. Like the way you talk to your mom is different than the way that you talk to your friends or the way you talk to your girlfriend. So same thing with all the behaviors that we create are basically ourselves, which just like you're saying, depends on the circumstances and the people we're interacting with. We change certain things, like the exposure thing, right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Julie?
I'm thinking about this artist named James Enzor,
Mm.
and he did there's a big painting that he did over at the Getty, and it's of a giant event, and everybody has masks. His family made masks for the community, for the people where they lived. I'll put the painting in the chat in a minute. Um, and I think that what happened back in the 18th century was they had special events where they would wear the masks and they were able to become these other people.
Mm.
Um, So I'm not sure, Mr. Green, Nelly, the writer um was totally right about that. I mean, in the sense that I think that we do when we interact with people, you know, at the cafe or wherever, um, our true self does come out. Alcohol had a big role in that, especially during the 18th century.
Mhm.
I mean, you can't really act when you're on alcohol. It's like, your real self comes out, you know? So I think there is this like sort of like time where we are allowed to wear the mask.
Mhm.
And that to me is an interesting idea.
Yeah. I think
I
what
don't, did I make sense?
yeah, yeah, you made sense. And I think that what it made me think about is one of the reasons why Batman in particular is one of my favorite comic book characters, because at least probably like since the 80s, Batman has been in the comics, only more recently, maybe in the movies. But Batman has been really explored from the perspective of, is Batman the real character or is Bruce Wayne the real character? Bruce Wayne is kind of the hurt orphan, um, acting out, or is Batman who he was always meant to be? So it maybe speaks a little bit to the idea of like, you know, craziness, really, because his nemesis is the Joker, who is clearly crazy, but is Batman also crazy, as an individual? And it's just, I think that there's maybe something to the idea that, are we really our truest selves when we can hide behind the safety of a mask, or are we always our truest selves, only changing our behavior a little based on the circumstances? you and that might be how you could interpret this
Mm,
this human exposure triangle too, because like I said,
yeah.
in photography you can't help but if you want a properly exposed photo, you can't help but change the shutter speed if you're going to a lower ISO, or if you're opening your aperture more, you're going to have to maybe slow down your shutter speed. So each one of these elements is going to interact and inform the other, you see. And so I guess in my own way, I'm trying to say, that the human exposure triangle is the same, right? The more we understand our own perspectives, the more we can then begin to look at our personal biases, and we can maybe understand how mental acuity, based on our age, plays a role, and then how, as we get older, we are able to reflect on the things that have happened to us, and maybe come away with a new understanding of why things happened the way they did, or what we were meant to learn from them, or who knows, right? Qué sé yo. Uh, but yeah, I appreciate everyone's input on this, because I just came up with this. It's not like this is set in stone or a theory that has been tested. It's just my thoughts. Roots.
Roots.
It makes me think of that book, Dr. Jekyll. What is it called? You
Mhm.
guys know which one I'm talking about? And
Yeah.
Mr. Clyde, I think.
Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
What with there you go. With what you guys are talking about, so it just, especially with what Luis said about Batman, it's like, which one was the good guy? Because I guess he was a doctor, right? But he was inside like an evil person because he wanted like to be recognized or whatever, but then he also wanted to like do his little deeds on the side without anybody like knowing. So it's like, which one was he really? Like, was he really the facade that he gave society, or was he really the person he was trying to hide inside?
Mhm.
So like the doctor or Hyde.
Mhm.
So yeah, I was just thinking that when you guys were talking about that. So I just wanted to share that.
Ooh, yeah, no, I think that's a
Can I
good interpretation. Yes, Erica?
Can I share something? And I don't mind because it's the truth, and I always speak the truth. So I just recently wrote a poem about the fact that my niece passed away, and I didn't drink. 10 years sober, alcoholic, and the craziest thing is I wrote that is that that woman lives inside me. I just don't let her come out
Yeah, that's
because she'll always be a part of me. The moment that I think that she doesn't exist, the moment that I can fall again. And
mhm.
so for me, she exists. It's just that I choose to be sober. So it kind of goes with everything we're talking about. But yeah, that reminded me of that.
Thank you for sharing that, Erica, and a big congratulations on the 10 years sober. That's quite an accomplishment. Very proud of you.
Thank you.
Um, I also really like I almost want to call it a mantra that Carolyn shared in the chat. I look at the world like I'm waiting to take a photo. I love that. Because I feel like that could be a mantra, right? That could be a way in which
Yeah.
we interact with the world. So thank you for sharing that, Carolyn. And then River added, "Oh yeah, the moment one pretends she's gone, and the moment is the moment one can fall." I really feel that statement. Abraham, you have something else to add?
Oh, just I forgot her name. Erika, right? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have heard that story, and then I found fascinated that you speak about addiction. And I always try to tell people who hasn't encountered any of these is like, because they was thinking, oh, why they don't get over it or so on. It's like, no, they're never gonna stop having that. It's part of their life now. So it's how do they deal with that part of themselves for the rest of their life, which is it's interesting that you brought it again. I hope. Thanks.
Yeah. I appreciate everyone's thoughts. It helps to obviously share these thoughts around these things because they do, again, impact the way in which we approach not just our creativity but our lives. And I think that it's valuable for us to be able to have conversations like these, even if they can get a little awkward sometimes. um Many die many years before legally announced. Yeah. Yeah. um Thank you for sharing that, Mojde. It reminds me of something that I saw in a movie recently. There's a line in a movie, Saturday Night Fever, where John Travolta's character says something along the lines of, "There's a lot of ways to kill yourself without killing yourself." Um, so, anyways, back to the handout here. Um, I wanted to, I guess, begin kind of getting people's thoughts going and maybe writing them down. And this could help you, obviously, as we go to the homework later. But I'd like you all to think back to when you were 6 years old. What did you want to be when you grow up? And then, as a follow up, at what age did that goal change? So, if you want to, you can add that to the chat. You're more than welcome to. I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about this. Y para los compañeros que prefieren en español, piensa atrás al momento en que tenías 6 años de edad. ¿Qué soñabas ser cuando ya eras grande? ¿Y a qué edad cambió esa meta para ti? You weren't sure you wanted to be anything? Well, that's all right. I guess the follow-up
You want
question
us
was,
to share it in the
yeah,
chat?
yeah,
Is
you can
that
share it
what
in
you
the
said?
chat if you feel comfortable doing so, or you can
Okay.
share it out loud too. So yeah, I guess
I like that. I wanted to be older. Like mission accomplished.
I like that Roots wrote that, she wanted to be an artist and illustrate children's books. Lo and behold, and definitely mission accomplished on the getting older.
Well,
Mostly
there you go
wanted to go
camping.
camping. Yeah.
Whee!
one thing, since this is, an exercise to hopefully get you, thinking about your homework, um, make sure that whatever you write, potentially also make a note of it, whether that be a mental note or a written note in your notebook if you have one. Because like I said, this could maybe help you for the homework later. Nettie wrote, at 6, I wanted to be a preacher or president. At 24, I did a 180 and I'm a writer.
Yeah, yeah. This is a very wonderful topic. When I was 6 years age, I reading this wonderful child picture book. This name called the Peacock Princess. So can you believe it? This is super beautiful princess because you know that peacock have beautiful, beautiful dress. So yeah, I wonder, yeah, this is very good. Why? Maybe one day I can make something happen, made my child picture book for my owner. So yeah, it's a very good topic. So yeah.
Oh, cool. Thank you for sharing that, Heidi. I see a couple more dreams in the chat here. A couple of people seems like they wanted to be illustrators, artists, writers, and that it changed for some of you in your teens, it looks like. Lo and behold, though, here you are. Sold flower seeds and had a paper route, and then I had to get a job and work for the man to earn money. I fell into the job hole for decades thereafter. Yeah, I can relate with that, Julie. Although I mean, I guess in my sense, working for the man really was just kind of working for the nonprofit world, man. But still, doing things that I didn't necessarily want to do. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a writer. At 6 years old, truth be told, I remember this exercise when I was in first grade. My teacher asked us to draw what we wanted to be when we were older. And I looked up to my dad so much at the time, you know, and I wanted to be just like my dad. I wanted to drive a red Ford Ranger and I wanted to work as a groundskeeper at a golf course and as a landscaper. Um, and I actually remember the reaction that my teacher had, and I felt like she felt sad for me because that was all I wanted to do was just, be a landscaper. But she didn't realize that it was really that I wanted to be my dad. I wanted to be
Yeah.
like my dad,
Aw.
you know. But again, part of my human exposure triangle, right? Like it was her implicit biases that, painted the way in which she thought I understood the exercise. She
Mm.
thought that I wasn't aspiring for more when I was in my mind aspiring for the biggest thing that I could be, was my dad.
Yeah.
And
At
that's
least
only something that now I can recognize.
you didn't say you were going to be a farm worker.
Yeah. I appreciate all of you who are sharing in the chat. River writes, I think it changed for me in junior high because by that time I had been shaped into someone I didn't recognize, and I had to decide who I wanted to be, if I wanted to be. So my goal changed to figure out how to re-inject my own humanity as opposed to just existing as I was. And yeah, there is some money in landscaping, Nettie. I agree with that. Landscaping is indeed an art form. Thank you, Carolyn. A beautiful job being in nature. Absolutely. Abraham, see you raised your hand again.
Did I?
Or is it just still up?
Yeah, I think it's still up.
Okay. All right. There you go. Well, again, I appreciate those of you who shared. But do keep these things in mind, right? Keep in mind, what was it that you wanted to do at that age? And when did it change? Now, let's look at a little bit of photography. Here we have a photograph that was taken, actually scanned out of this book in particular. For those of you who are able to see my little camera here, this comes from the photographer Eugene Smith. Aquí tengo su biografía. un poquito, algo cortito. Eugene Smith falleció el 15 de octubre en el año 1978. Fue fotoperiodista norteamericano, describido como quizá el singularmente más importante fotógrafo norteamericano en el desarrollo del ensayo editorial fotográfico. Eugene Smith is definitely known for his photo essay work, editorial photo essays, being a photojournalist, especially one that worked for National Geographic, among many other magazines and newspapers. He was fortunate enough to travel a lot. This particular photo comes from one of the series that he did in Pittsburgh, where he kind of became obsessed with the city of Pittsburgh. And it's called Untitled Girl Holding Branch Watching Two Girls Pick Blossoms. Y como pueden ver aquí en la capción de la foto, it was, as it says here, a major undeclared by him chapter of Smith's multifaceted Pittsburgh study is the series of portraits of the city's children, often put in positions of preference to those of the city's adults. The adults, especially the men, are often seen as foils to the gainful exercises of heavy industry or bureaucracy, while the children are seen as mindful of the more intangible, enjoyable things in life. Let's take a moment, just enjoy the photo. Compositionally, I do want to say, there's some really nice things that are happening in terms of composition. You have what looks like an older girl in the background, in the midground, a slightly younger girl, and then the youngest girl in the foreground who is holding a branch with a lot of flowers. Meanwhile, the other two girls, the slightly older girls, are obviously being more deliberate about the flowers that they're choosing. But if you look at it, it forms a nice little triangle. You have a lot of different things happening within the frame. Again, foreground, midground, and background. You have good contrast. Yeah, the girls' heads form a triangle, exactly, Nettie. So, exposure triangle at work, right? He was shooting film, so clearly he had to be able to manipulate the image in a way that obviously captured motion, or maybe a little bit of motion, maybe not too much, but certainly the contrast and a lot of the other things that would make for a properly exposed photo. So I definitely like this one. And again, this is from Eugene Smith. I recommend you check him out if you're interested in learning more about photo essays. Now, the next couple of photos come from a book that I found actually many years ago at a book fair. It's called Infancia. You probably can't really see it too well in my frame here. But this is a a book that collects photos by many different photographers from Mexico. This first one is called Mauricio, and it's by the photographer Cecilia Candelaria. Cecilia Candelaria es un fotoperiodista y también conservadora de la Ciudad de México. As a curator, I couldn't really find much of a bio, but as a curator, she did relatively recently curate a photo exhibit in Mexico City. This one is from 1999. Y como pueden ver aquí, tenemos a un niño que parece estar jugando con una guitarra. What do you think the little boy wanted to be when he grew up?
His dad.
He wanted to be in a band. Yeah. Very good lighting too. Yeah, I agree, Abraham. Good contrast. He wanted to be Bob Dylan. Yeah, exactly, Nettie. Again, notice kind of like a triangle effect that's happening here too, right? The way that the little boy's legs are propped up, we got a little bit of a triangular motion kind of going, triangular shape. His head down here in the bottom right, the way he's holding the guitar, lining up almost perfectly with the leg, the upper leg, so just looking at the composition, right? The triangle playing kind of a role here. Contrasts are playing a role here. And I love the little smile. Yeah, the smile is the star of the photo. Yeah, thank you, Abraham. Yeah, he just seems so serene, right? So happy. Before we move on to the next photo, I want to again get you thinking. If somebody were to take a photo of you, maybe when you were 12 years old, or maybe when you were 6 years old, was there maybe a photo where it reflected what you wanted to be? If not, that's okay. But do think about this, right? Now age yourself up by 6 years. Now you're 12 years old. What did you want to be when you grew up? When you were 12 years old, what did you want to be when you got older? And again, at what age did that change? You wanted to be a Ninja Turtle, Abraham?
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Órale, hermano. Otra vez, piensen, 6 años han pasado. Ya no son de 6 años de edad, ahora son de 12 años de edad. Entrando a la adolescencia. ¿Qué soñaban ser ya de grande? Heidi writes, when I was 12 years old, I couldn't get my diploma from primary school because I was in poor health and failed the physical education exam. Thank you.
Yeah, this is real story.
Yeah. When I was when I was 6 years old, like I shared, right, I wanted to be my dad, which my teacher didn't understand, right? She didn't get that. Obviously, this is me speaking as I'm older. I just wanted to be like my idol, my role model, my dad. She thought I wanted to just simply be a gardener, but what did she know? But when I turned 12 years old, I do remember it was at 12 years old that I finally came to the realization that artists create comics. And at 12 years old, that's when I was like, I'm going to get very serious about my drawing and my writing, and I'm going to start creating my own comics. So there I was in 7th grade, and I joined my school's newspaper, and I started creating little comic strips for my newspaper. That was my first experience as a little artist. Nice. I think I probably also wanted to be a Power Ranger too, Carolyn. um, that's a great goal, by the way. You continue working towards that. Um, Julie writes, I wrote an amazing story at 12. I was an ant. I loved writing after that. My teacher helped me, Mrs. Williamson. I was never encouraged after that. I got lost in my work. Sorry to hear that, Julie. But I'm glad that you had an ally there at one point, someone to really give you the porras, to really root you along. Yes, and you are back now. River wrote, I think I wanted to be a poet/writer, and then I changed my mind in high school. Yeah, that can happen. Sounds like you were definitely on the path to becoming a Power Ranger, Carolyn. You were in Taekwondo. Nice. Erica won a writing contest in high school on why football is so violent. Nice. That's good. Made it almost to a black belt. Sweet. Yeah, Carolyn is definitely a Power Ranger. You may not think it, but I think it, Carolyn. You are a Power Ranger.
You don't want to mess with Caroline.
I can throw a punch.
There you go. Why give it a color though, right? Red? All right. Carolyn chose. Yeah, the Red Ranger is cool.
Somebody really knows. Or
Red
green,
or green.
exactly. There you go. And I
Yeah,
wasn't
there
even
you
a
go.
fan, but I know.
Not gonna lie, when I was a kid, those were my favorite, the Red Ranger and the Green Ranger. I wish I could have been the Green Ranger. Then he became the White Ranger, and I was like, that's cool. I like the Green Ranger version better. El que sabe, sabe. All right. So going back to this image, though, the beautiful thing that I like about the book Infancia, where I got this image from, is that the curator of the book did an excellent job putting the whole book together. Next to this photo, they added this photo, which I'm going to zoom out a bit so that you can get the full effect of it. This one is called Popolucas and San Pedrito, and this was taken in Veracruz in the year 2000, so around the same time period. The photographer of this one is Rodrigo Vasquez. I tried my best to find a bio. The best I was able to find is that he is continuing to do photography for the past 25 years. And if it is in fact the same Rodrigo Vasquez, he is on Instagram as Rodorod. So RODOROD, Rodorod. And if it's not the same photographer, then I apologize, obviously, to the photographer. But the individual that is on Instagram, I definitely recommend you check him out. I was going through their Instagram feed, and excellent photographer. But now we have kind of a comparison, right? You can clearly tell that this is an older boy, based on stature again, or at least the perception of stature because of the photo being shot from a low angle. So, perspective, right? One of the tools that we learned. And then we have here a broken guitar, and it looks like he's holding a bota de charro, like a cowboy boot, with it almost looks like a cigarette in his hand, but I can't quite tell. But I think that in contrast, right, there's something to the shifting of perspectives. Here we have a photo, a very innocent looking child playing with his guitar. And now we have a child that maybe doesn't appear to be as innocent, but certainly, there's a little bit of storytelling happening there. Thank you for looking up Popoluca there for us, Abraham.
I
Popoluca
had
is
to. I didn't know what it was.
Popoluca is a Castilian word that means barbarians or people speaking a foreign language. It is also the name of a traditional name for various Mixe Soquian languages in Mexico. The name Popoluca is a traditional name for a language belonging to the Otomanguean languages. Interesting. I did not know that. So I wanted to share this one because, again, perspectives changed, right? The stature of the child has changed. The overall composition style has changed. Clearly, it's two different photographers also, since we know that it is two different people. But I think it's worth considering the fact that, when you put certain things together, you can start to develop a story, right? And since this whole book was really about childhood and the experience of childhood, I think it's worth it for us to consider that, we can contrast our childhood experiences. And again, we can benefit from reflecting on them to then create something new. Now, this photo comes from a photographer, a very, very, not broadly known photographer by the name of Luis Antonio Pichardo. This photo I took actually when I was in the city of Mexico, Ciudad de Mexico, in 2021. I took a nice vacation with my girlfriend there. We were there for 3 weeks, and I managed to get some really good photos, and this happened to be one of them. This photo, I don't obviously have a title for it, but it's what I call shot from the hip. You've probably heard that term before if you're a photographer too. It's when you take a photo really without trying, from below, like eye level, really. You can shoot a photograph from your chest level. You can shoot it from your hip level, and you will get interesting perspectives. And this is always a good technique to try to shift your point of view, right? Going back to one of our earlier lessons, entre más experimentas con diferentes puntos de vista, más interesantes pueden salir las fotos. So with this photo, when I saw the little boy, I do remember thinking this: I want to get a shot of him kind of looking at the world. Notice he's not looking forward where he's walking. He's looking off to the side, just, I don't know, daydreaming, maybe intrigued by something that he sees across the street. And I really don't know what he was thinking, but I really like kind of the simplicity of it, him being led by the hand and on his own, right? In his own little world. Then there's another photo that I wanted to share. This one is actually of one of my, I don't even know. I mean, he's in Spanish, I would call him my sobrino. He's the daughter, or sorry, the son of one of my cousins. And we were in San Juan del Rio in 2022. That's in Querétaro, Mexico. And we were at a mall because I had a grant that I needed to, yeah, exactly, comprando botas. But I had a grant that was due while I was in Mexico visiting my grandfather who was very sick. And I needed to go to the mall because that's the only place where I could get Wi-Fi. And as we were walking around after I finished my work, we were looking at boots. And I just remembered when I was little, I used to have my own pair of botas de charro, and in this particular photo, he looked a lot like me when I was his age. There's just, something about the pichardos that we we all look the same when we're little. And there was just that sort of like parallelism that I was noticing in life, as I got older, the younger generations of my family experienced some of the same things that I experienced. So um yeah, I wanted to capture the moment of being there with him and my cousin and her husband. And you know I just thought it was a cool photo to share, and really, again, to just kind of express that we can experience a lot of things on our own and think that no one else does experience them, but there's always going to be another generation that experiences very similar things. um and if it's going to inspire you, then I definitely recommend, use the phone, the camera on your phone, use a camera that you carry, just capture the moments, because it's moments that matter, right? Moments that we can relive and learn from, grow from. All of those things are very valuable. Now, as we move on, I have this last question that I want to encourage you all to think about. What do you do now that was once a childhood dream? What are you actively doing that you used to think you wanted to do, or that you wished you could do? Writing, obviously, for some of you. Are there other things in addition to that? Art, painting, great. Love to see those things. Business, have a greater understanding of the world. You're a musician. Excellent. ¿Qué más? Writing and getting published, and now helping students publish their work. Awesome. Those are all great things. Not much I need to confront this. Nettie. You'll be president. I believe in you, Nettie.
Would you vote for him? Come on,
I
Luis.
mean,
How
I'm
do you
not
mean you vote?
no soy ciudadano de Guatemala, but I mean, if I
Pues,
was.
ay, mira, ay, te puedes comenzar ahorita.
There you go. You have one vote, Nettie. Writing and singing music. There we go. See? All right. So think about these things as we look at this photo here. So again, this is one of the photos that I took. I actually decided to call it Místico No Más. For those who know, or for those who don't know, this is a luchador mask of specifically El Místico, one of the luchadores that is currently in the Confederación Mundial de la Lucha Libre. So he does actually appear in Mexican Lucha Libre currently, and he's been a multiple time champion, world champion. I did want to share the photo in its final form here, but I also want to show you how I got to this version of the photo, because I think it's good to know that for the purpose of our exercises here for the class, you don't have to necessarily go out and take a new photo. This photo, again, I took this photo about a year and a half ago now, with my nephew in Querétaro, and I just did some very minor edits here. This is Adobe Lightroom that we're looking at right now. At least I hope you can see Lightroom. And there's just some basic stuff here, exposure adjustments, contrast adjustments. I did use curves, and this is one of those things that I actually wanted to specifically highlight, both in Snapseed as well as in Adobe Lightroom or Adobe Photoshop. If you're using any of those apps, they do give you the opportunity and ability to use curves. Curves is how you can get certain types of tones of color. To give you an example, for this particular photo, this is the original photo. I don't know if you can see the difference here, but it looks more washed out. This is what the iPhone was able to capture. It's kind of a meh photo, in my opinion, not the best. Using curves and some other small adjustments, this was what I was able to get. Right? I brought the colors up. I made it look a little bit more vintagey, at least in my opinion. But that's what curves can help you do. Now, obviously, this one was taken again, with my camera in Mexico City. This is the original version. I personally like the colors. I like the blue and everything. It works really well for the photo. But to just demonstrate some of the things that I did, right? I converted it to monochrome using Lightroom again. I made some adjustments here for the exposure, contrast, highlights, all of those things. And then the curves, again, here in this section, you can see that they are impacting the final brightness of the white areas and the darkness of the darkest parts, the shadows. So, while it does look more vivid, I think in color, and I probably would also keep a version of it in color, I do like how the black and white looks. But to go back to this particular photo, I took it back when I was working at 826LA, another nonprofit in LA. And the original photo looks really washed out. I mean, I kept the photo because I don't know, I just thought there was something kind of special to it, but um, using the curves over here, I went through each color channel. That's the nice thing about using curves, is that you can change the channel of the color to be, specifically changing the one color like range within the photo. So using the curves adjustments, you're able to go either one way more red, one way more green. In this particular case, I just wanted to give it just a little bit of a reddish hue there. And then if you go to the green, you can map out the greens as well. This one I just did 1 point in the curves. And rather than going too far green or too far magenta here, I tried to just boost it just a little bit in the midtones to give me that kind of saturation. Now you can get a little bit crazy with these and do things that look very, very bright, very, very vivid, one way or another. By changing the color channels, you can start to get really funky with your edits. And make colors that you would never see in natural, what's it called, natural light. So that's a cool thing about the curves tool, and I definitely suggest that you all look at using that when you go to edit your photos. Just because it's a really nice way of I don't know, giving a almost film-like look to your digital photos. Because again, remember, this is how it looked originally, very washed out. It's clearly done with a digital camera. At least I think it's pretty clear that it's a digital camera. But the curves adjustments in Lightroom, in Snapseed, or Photoshop, that's a very, very powerful tool that a lot of people don't realize can give you some really cool effects. So, yeah, that was just like a quick little thing since Abraham's been showing how to use some of these tools. Figured, why not show you myself? Now, in response to this photo, kind of going back to what I was saying before about, using photos and in our case, photography and poetry together, you can create some, stories there with the combination of the two. So for this particular photo, I created a brand new poem that I'd like to share for all of you joining us today. Keep in mind, I did write this just a little while ago, so it's not like my best work, but if there's any volunteer that would like to read it, I'm more than happy to pass on the mic. Do I have anybody that'd like to read the English or the Spanish? So River, if you would like to read it for us in Spanish, you're more than welcome to do so.
Okay. Místico no más. Luchador, volabas, volabas y cantabas. Ahora cantas entre alientos por pena y vuelas. En moto, tu máscara, casco tricolor y tu llave, vencedor es solo para lápices o plumas. Cualquier que se te atraviese. Y las botas de charro que tenías cambiaste por botas de leñador para trepar las calles de tu ciudad, imaginar que la poesía es algo místico y nada más.
Thank you, River. So I'll read it for us in English one more time, and I'll read it in Spanish one more time to give you a chance to hear it. So, mystical and nothing more. Luchador, you flew. You flew and sang. Now you sing between breaths out of embarrassment, and you fly on a motorcycle. Your mask, tricolored, helmet, and your finishing move is only for pencils or pens, whichever crosses your path. And the cowboy boots you once had, you changed for lumberjack boots for climbing the streets of your city, and imagine that poetry is something mystical and nothing else. En español, místico no más. Luchador, volabas, volabas y cantabas. Ahora cantas entre alientos por pena y vuelas en moto. Tu máscara, casco, tricolor, y tu llave, vencedor, es solo para lápices o plumas, cualquier que se te atreviese. Y las botas de charro que tenías cambiaste por botas de leñador para trepar las calles de tu ciudad e imaginar que la poesía es algo místico y nada más. You see the three photos combined? Yeah. I tried to combine the three photos in the poem here a little bit because a lot of the things that I'm talking about are things that are also, part of my childhood too. So does anyone have any questions? See, I thought I saw Nettie raise his hand.
I meant to send the clapping thing, but I
Okay.
got it confused.
Okay.
But I think Heidi won.
Yeah.
I think she raised her.
Yeah. Did you raise your hand, Heidi, or was that an accident?
No, this before. Sorry, before I was reading this. No.
Oh, okay. I mean, if you have any comments, I'm more than welcome. You're more than welcome to comment on the poem. But before we do that, I do want to make sure that you all get the homework because, we had a lot to say about, the human exposure triangle, as I called it. And I think that our conversation was a very useful conversation, at least for the sake of wrapping up our series here. This is the last of the writing prompts that we'll be giving you. As a reminder, on May 7th, that is the last day to turn in your work to be featured in the next issue of Conchas y Café zine. So please do be sure to send us your work as soon as possible. But next week, we will be giving you another chance to workshop. And then the following week, on May 7th, I'll be available to do a kind of like an office hours to help anybody that is having issues with uploading their photography or their poetry to Submittable. So, la tarea para esta semana es: toma una foto que captura un algo especial de tu niñez y escribe un poema dedicado al niño o niña en ti. As the homework, create a photo that captures something special from your childhood and write a poem dedicated to the child in you. In the end, that's what I was really trying to go for with this poem. You know, El Místico, I've been a fan of El Místico as a wrestler for a long time. But in general, some of the things that I wanted to do when I was little, I didn't get to do then, but now I am, right? Now I can, ride a motorcycle to my heart's content, and I write poetry, and I don't wear my cowboy boots like I used to, but I do have, my motorcycle boots, and I just, try to have fun when I can, by flying down the city streets. So, um I hope that this at least gives you a little bit of inspiration, momentum, however you want to call it. You can find an object and you can stage it as I did here to replicate something that maybe is significant to your childhood. Um, but I definitely encourage you to come up with a photo or find an old photo that represents that something special from your childhood and write a poem dedicated to the younger you. Abraham?
Quick, a question on your poem. When
Yeah.
when you say llaves, you mean llaves as moves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
As
maniobras.
luchador moves. Okay, I was just curious on that one. And also, we have Heidi's has a question on how to submit photos and.
Yeah. So, as I've mentioned before, go to our website, distillarts.org/Conchas y Café zine. You'll find the link there that will take you to our submittable page. So you can.
Just one more question. Is there a minimum, or can we just submit as many as we want?
There
Is
is.
there a maximum?
Yeah, I mean, the minimum would obviously be one, but the maximum is
One?
going to be up to you. Yeah, there's no specific or set minimum or maximum for those of you that are enrolled in the program, as long as it's obviously to the theme. If it's not part of the theme through the
It's the
lens, then
through the
it
lens.
probably wouldn't really fit. But you can go to our website. You can see some of the information there. Abraham also put the direct link for the submittable page, which has more information about the specs. Right, there's certain specifications, especially for photos, to make them reproducible in print. So that is very important that you follow. River, you raised your hand as well.
One more question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Erica. You're
I was just gonna say, because you said that we could. You can't hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Can
you.
you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me or no? Okay,
Yes, we
sorry.
can hear you.
You said that there's two opportunities to submit. One is the Conchas y Café, and then you have your regular zine. Is it the same deadline?
No, Conchas y Café zine is May 7th. Our other zines have different like staggered dates for closing submissions. LA Transit, that book
Okay.
in particular, is May 15th. And then Art Block Zine is May 31st. And then Artistic Zine is in July 31st, if I remember correctly. But definitely make sure you
Thank
go to
you.
the website to be clear of which one you're submitting to, and follow the link to the submittable page, the designated submittable page.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. And then River, thank you for your patience.
So if we submit a poem from an assignment, do we need to submit the accompanying photos we took with the assignment?
You don't have to if you don't want to. Just like with everything, with us, it's whatever you feel comfortable submitting, and that could be both a photo and a poem that go together. You can submit them together. If it's just the photos, you can submit just photos. That's perfectly fine. If it's just poems, you can submit just poems. Either way, as long as they fit the theme, then they will be accepted. Thank you for submitting work early, Julie. I really appreciate that. And as a quick little extra, sorry, real quick, you are able to submit photos in color. This particular issue, we are going to pay extra to print it in color. So you can submit photos in color as well as in black and white. That's probably something that was pending. That was your question. Okay, there you go, River. Any other questions? I'll go ahead and stop sharing the screen here. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Julie?
One of the things that I noticed in when I submitted my photographs was that I had to format them as 5x8 photographs. So I had to add like a top and bottom to it to create, which I used the canvas size feature to do that, to accomplish that. So if you do submit a photograph, that's one of the things. Am I right about that?
Yeah, you are correct.
5x8.
Yeah, the final book will be
Okay.
a 5x8 size, and so if you have very important elements of your image on the edges, just know there's a chance that they might get cut off in the placement of the book or in the book. But the zine itself we'll try our best to preserve people's images as much as possible. But yeah, 5x8 is going to be, generally speaking, the formatting. All right.
Are you saying we should add a little border maybe?
Yeah, you could
Just
add a
to
little
make
bit of
sure that
border.
it's
If you add a little bit of a border,
okay.
as long as it stays within the 5x8 constraints, then we should be good.
Okay.
All right. Any other final questions before we give our good nights?
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
My pleasure. So
Night.
thank you again, everybody.
Having
Just as a little reminder, next week will be our last workshopping session where we will break up into our cohorts. So, definitely take advantage. You are more than welcome to send us work that you have worked on previously. If we can fit it within the workshopping session, we will. If not, we'll do our best to obviously give you feedback still, but next week is the last of the workshopping sessions. And then on May 7th, that will be 2 weeks from today. That will be the day that all work is due before midnight, 11:59 p.m. So, and I'll be available that Tuesday night, for about an hour or so to help anybody troubleshoot issues they might be having with Submittable. So thank you again, everybody. I hope you'll enjoy the exercise, the
Thank you,
prompts.
Abraham.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you all next week.